Hey, can you guys hear me okay? Yeah. Awesome. So as mentioned, my name is Ryan Letourneau, but I'm probably, I just got dripped on. I'm probably more well known by the online pseudonym Northern Lion. So over the past 3 years since I've started the Northern Lion channel, as mentioned, I've produced about 2,000 videos, primarily focused on indie games and the world of indie gaming, ranging from reviews, previews, walkthroughs, let's plays, and stuff like that. And I've been lucky enough that this channel has grown well beyond my wildest expectations to the point where I've been pursuing it as my full-time job over the course of the past year and a half. So that's basically been my life since 2010. Thank you. And what's really interesting about this is that people always tell me, like, oh, what you do is so rare and so unique. And although I'm lucky to be doing what I'm doing, I definitely don't think it's that unique because by my estimation, there's anywhere between 500 and 2,000 people that basically exist full-time producing games coverage on YouTube or Twitch. And I want to make the distinction because I am going to be talking mostly about YouTube today, but a lot of what I talk about is going to be applicable on Twitch as well. So beyond those 500 to 2,000 people that have a really significant audience they live full-time off of producing coverage for, there's also 10,000, maybe 100,000 people out there producing videos on a more casual or hobby-level basis. And as you might expect, the focus of my talk today is going to be on how to get your game into their hands, and hopefully they'll cover it and be able to expose your game to, collectively, maybe hundreds of thousands or millions of people. So before we start talking about how to actually find these guys and interface with them and make it likely that they'll cover your game, I think it's important to really kind of articulate the importance of YouTube or the value that it can have for indie game marketing. So to do this, I actually solicited some quotations that I could use from indie game developers that I've worked with positively in the past. So our first quote is going to come from Mike Bithell, who was the developer of Thomas Was Alone. I hope the text isn't too small, but Mike Bithell sent me this in an email. Indies love word of mouth. We can't afford paid advertising or tickets to every convention. We need fans to talk about our stuff amongst themselves and spread the word for us. With the rise of the YouTuber, we've seen that individuals out there are capable of spreading their tastes and opinions to massive audiences. Without YouTubers, I strongly suspect Thomas Was Alone would never have reached anywhere near the audience it did. I'll always be grateful for that, and I can't wait to send them all my next game. And true to Mike's point here, I did a random YouTube search for Thomas Was Alone, and again, I hope you guys can see these numbers, but here's two very prominent videos from some noteworthy YouTubers, Official Nerd Cubed and Total Biscuits, covering Thomas Was Alone, and obviously these videos have hundreds of thousands of views, and that's not necessarily the norm, but it's worth noting that when I looked up Thomas Was Alone on YouTube, there were about 350,000 results, and I manually went through like the first 30 pages, and none of them were irrelevant results. All of them were coverage related to the game. So even though not every YouTuber is necessarily as big as Total Biscuit or Official Nerd Cubed, collectively they hold an audience that's definitely not insignificant. So echoing Mike Bithell's sentiment, this is, well, his first name is Edmund. I hope that's not going to come up in some formatting a little bit later. But Edmund McMillan, obviously the designer of The Binding of Isaac and Super Meat Boy, and I actually lifted this quote from a postmortem that he did for The Binding of Isaac on Gama Sutra. So writing about that game, he said, we released it on Steam, and it was selling okay, eventually stabilizing at about 150 copies a day after a few months. But 5 months after release, something very odd happened. Our daily average started to climb, 200 copies per day turned into 500 copies, then 1,000 copies, and by the 7th month mark, Isaac was averaging sales of more than 1,500 copies a day and climbing. I couldn't explain it, then I checked out YouTube and noticed fans of the game were uploading Let's Play videos constantly. Over 100 videos every day, each getting tons of traffic. Isaac had found its fan base. So again, to kind of did what we did with the Thomas Was Alone videos, here's some prominent YouTube videos from a search for The Binding of Isaac. Selfishly, the top one is actually my own, but the second video here is from a friend of mine and also another prominent YouTuber, Zach Scott. So again, Isaac is one of those games that has hundreds of thousands of results on YouTube, and it's actually maybe a little bit more prolific on YouTube because of the roguelike elements or randomized elements, so every game is a little bit different for every YouTuber, so there's some incentivized coverage there. And for the final example to, again, kind of articulate the importance of YouTube for indie game marketing, I wanted to make an example of a developer who actually wasn't on a major distribution platform, because obviously for smaller indie developers, even just getting on something like Steam might be 90% of the battle. So even though you might not be personally familiar with Lucas Pope, odds are you are probably aware of Papers, Please, which is his game that came out in open beta a little bit earlier this spring and kind of became an overnight sensation. It picked up a lot of coverage and traction everywhere it went, it seemed like. And what's really noteworthy about Papers, Please is that it went through the Steam greenlight process, and it ended up being greenlit in only 20 days, which, if you're familiar with the kind of precedent on that platform, is really, really significant. So Lucas was nice enough to send me this graph here, and again, it might be a little bit too fuzzy, but basically, all of these data points are corresponding to coverage by prominent YouTubers, and the activity that coverage kind of precipitated on their greenlight page. And he actually wrote to me an email that I'll pull out here. Apologies. So he says, there was already a little buzz for Papers, Please before I put it on greenlight, but it wasn't until YouTube commentators started covering it that it really took off, starting with you and peaking insanely, as you can see at the end, with Total Biscuits. I was planning on writing an article on how or why the game only took 20 days to get greenlit, and I would have highlighted the YouTube connection as the main reason. So hopefully through these examples, you can understand how YouTube can be a really powerful engine to kind of drive consumers and just attention and exposure to indie games, whether you're on a major distribution platform or not. So now that we've kind of articulated that, let's talk about how to actually get your game into their hands and find them in the first place, because obviously it might be a little intimidating. I mentioned at the start of this presentation that there's maybe a few hundred people or 1,000 people doing this full time with really significant audiences, numbering in the tens and hundreds of thousands, and then tens and hundreds of thousands of people doing it on a more hobby or casual-like level. So that's the bad news. It's going to take you a long time to harvest all of these email addresses and contact all these people. The good news is that a gentleman by the name of Pixel Prospector was nice enough to kind of create a directory of these people already. So the link at the bottom is youtubers.pixelprospector.com. And this is just a directory of about 120 YouTubers who are known to cover indie games, either prolifically, exclusively, intermittently, or infrequently, but they've done it before. So this is definitely a good place to kind of start your contact list if you're looking to get your game out there on YouTube and also on Twitch TV via streaming. It's worth noting your mileage might vary with these people. Some of them cover indie games only rarely, but each of them commands kind of a significant audience that is definitely worth emailing, just in case, because they could expose your game to hundreds of thousands or 1 million people in one fell swoop. The other thing is that a lot of these people will probably contact you themselves, and the only advice I can really give there, because you're very lucky to be contacted by them, is to just be free and easy with your codes if you can afford to be in your builds and executables. So let's assume that you've found a list of maybe 120 people that you want to email. The next step is actually contacting these people and having them cover your game, because even small channels receive on the order of between 3 and a dozen unsolicited game requests a day. So obviously they can't look at those without really compromising the quality of their coverage. So you've got to find a way to make your game stand out. And for this, I thought it would be prudent just to do some very quick do's and don'ts, which will hopefully make things very easy and digestible. So the first tip is definitely do use email. Any YouTube channel that is significantly sized enough is going to have a businessy type email, and I would definitely not encourage you to use YouTube's built-in messaging function, because it's just irrelevant comments and spam and solicitations for liking other people's videos and stuff like that. So email is definitely much more well-suited for that, and it makes it probably 10 times more likely, at least in my experience, that they'll even see your message in the first place. Secondly, definitely include a code or a build if possible. Obviously, on the PC, this is easier. I'm not sure how it is on iOS if you get like a limited number of codes or anything like that. But yeah, on the PC, if it's possible, include a code or a build, mostly just to make it convenient for them, because I find that every barrier you put up when it comes to actually getting them to cover your game makes it less likely that they're going to cover it. So if you email them and you're like, well, I have this game, but there's no code at the end, if I'm only like 50% interested, or someone like me is only 50% interested, that might be enough to be like, oh, maybe I'll wait until it gains a little bit more buzz or something like that, because, I don't know, it just makes it a little bit more inconvenient. I'm going to combine the third and the fourth bullet here. So I'm going to say be brief. I think that's in your best interest, because the longer an email is, the less likely it's going to be read, or at least meaningfully read. And while being brief, explain your game's value. And I hope it doesn't come across as overly reductive or even borderline offensive. to say like, oh, distill like months and years of your hard work into a single sentence or two to pitch to these guys. But it actually is in your best interest. Again, it might sound a little offensive, but if you have some kind of gimmick or unique gameplay mechanic or something like that that you can pitch to them to make it seem like it's in their best interest to cover your game. So maybe you have like a unique graphical style or a gameplay mechanic that hasn't been seen that much, or even as personal as, you looked at their channel and they play a lot of roguelikes or something like that, and your game has roguelike elements. That might be something to consider. Just anything that makes it seem like your game stands out amongst the 3 to 12 or 20 that they might receive on a daily basis. Finally, don't be afraid to be a nuisance on Twitter. Like, there's been a number of situations where I missed a game's early request, and then the developers kind of made themselves known on Twitter and became a nuisance, but in like a positive way, like engaging me in conversation and stuff like that. Not necessarily just needling them to cover your game, but and then I went back and covered it. So be persistent. It doesn't hurt as long as you do it in a tasteful way. I'm going to quickly go through the don'ts because they're mostly mirror images of the do's. So definitely do not use YouTube messaging. It's probably a waste of your time. It's inefficient. Don't do interest checks. So again, I would love to reiterate this, put it in bold. Don't just email them and be like, would you like to cover our game? Just include a code, and the agreement is implicit. If they want to cover your game, and include all stipulations and embargo and stuff like that in the email if you have it. But yeah, if they want to cover your game, they can do it using the code that they were given. Finally, this one hopefully doesn't feel too wishy-washy, but definitely don't feel inferior to AAA PR or AAA publishers when it comes to this. And I know you might be feeling like, oh, I have a disadvantage because I work on my game full-time as a developer. I can't really hire like a AAA PR firm. I don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars to spend on marketing. Maybe I don't even have the time to do it. But that is actually one of the things that kind of incentivizes working with indie games and indie developers, in my opinion, is that you guys are 10 to 100 times easier to work with than AAA PR. And if possible, I would much rather spend my time playing interesting games made by good people and people that I respect than spend my days like ping-ponging emails back and forth for a 10% chance to get a review code for the Fast and the Furious Showdown or something. The second part of that don't feel inferior part does not appear to be working. But if we can just move to the... There we go. Yeah, the next part, we'll see if this works now. All right, I can actually do it. All right. It's all good. Is that there's a really ravenous audience. Oh, okay. There's a really ravenous audience when it comes to indie games on YouTube that doesn't necessarily exist in the mainstream press, even on websites like Joystick and Kotaku and stuff like that. So you might not be able to see these metrics too well here. But basically, I've cherry-picked like 3 examples from my channel where these are indie games, Go Home Dinosaurs, Papers, Please, and Spy Party, which have anywhere between roughly 60,000 and 100,000 views on each video, versus some fairly recent AAA games, Tomb Raider, Remember Me, and Metal Gear Rising, where they didn't perform nearly as well. So the indie games have anywhere between 4 to 5 times more views than the AAA stuff. So again, don't feel inferior just because you feel like you're not doing PR right. That's the right way to do PR, in my experience. And also, it's a two-way street, so don't feel like these YouTubers are doing you a favor by covering your game. It's a two-way street, so quite the opposite. That, your content is also the content that drives my growth and, my business, essentially. And, yes, YouTubers can expose your game to a wider audience, but it's win-win. At least that's the way I see it. So the final thing I want to talk about is dealing with rejection, because there is probably an inevitable situation where one or more or even the majority of people decide that they don't actually want to cover your game. And what's important to note here is that there's multiple reasons that people might not cover your game, and these reasons are going to vary from person to person. So here's some common ones that happened to me. Maybe I missed the email. As mentioned earlier, there's a lot of unsolicited game requests that come in every day. Just anecdotally, even at my size of channel, which is not really that large, I get between 400 and 1,000 emails a day. So it's fairly common for me to miss even multiple emails from people. So definitely pays to be persistent and send follow-up emails or tweets. Maybe they read it and they weren't interested at first just from the blurb or the pitch that you gave them. Maybe it's too early in development for them to give it the coverage they feel it deserves, and maybe it'll benefit from a little bit more time in the cooker. Maybe there's technical issues or bugs, and this might even come down to them having like a software or hardware issue with a capture unit or something like Fraps. And obviously the worst one that we can see here is maybe they played it and they didn't like it. But the reason I articulated all of these answers is because even though there's a lot of reasons that someone may not play your game or cover your game when you first send the media blast, only one of these reasons really means that they'll never recover it. So all of these are not necessarily no's, but more like, maybe later, maybe not later, but maybe later as well. So just because your initial media blast doesn't really produce that much fruit doesn't necessarily mean that your chances on YouTube for marketing are sunk forever. The other thing I wanted to mention is if like the prominent YouTubers that you're contacting aren't really giving you coverage, don't be afraid to kind of like fertilize the YouTube garden by sending out emails to smaller channels. It's a well-known fact that games can kind of grow virally on YouTube. So there's been a lot of situations where maybe I didn't see or I ignored like the first request that I got for a game, but then I see that my friends are playing it, or I see smaller channels being successful with it on YouTube, and then that spreads from them to me, and then maybe that spreads from me, not that I'm necessarily a tastemaker or anything like that, but just naturally spreads from me to other people, and then it can kind of bloom wider and wider and wider. And I'm not going to go into specifics, but this is a recent example. And the very last thing is, it's an old cliche and an old adage, but there are plenty of fish in the sea, especially on YouTube and Twitch versus traditional media. In traditional journalism, if you don't get covered on like Kotaku or Polygon or IGN, et cetera, it might be kind of like a feast or famine market, like you might be out of luck. But with YouTube, again, there's hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of people that can really help you out. So again, anecdotally, these are screenshots taken from a website called Social Blade that is basically an aggregate of YouTube analytics. And according to Social Blade, I have the 482nd largest YouTube gaming channel by subscribers. Thank you. And the 203rd largest by lifetime views. So what that means, and those numbers have been very good to me, and I'm very proud of those numbers. It took a long time to get there. But what this means is that if someone like me, or even me specifically, declines to cover your game, there's anywhere between 200 and 500 people that have larger channels that might be more than happy to cover it, and that's totally ignoring the thousands and tens of thousands of people with smaller channels that still command significant audiences. So definitely, again, be persistent. Kind of have like a wide arc with your coverage requests, and just because they're not covering it right away, you can afford to be a little bit more patient. You don't necessarily need to have an enormous launch. But anyway, that's gonna do it for my talk here. So here's my contact information. I hope you guys found the talk informative and maybe a little entertaining, and feel free to ask me any questions on email, Twitter, or check out my YouTube page if you're interested. Thank you.